The Moon and the Bonfires by Cesare Pavese. Chapter 1. There's a reason I came back to this village and not to Canelli, Barbaresco, or Alba. I wasn't born here, that's fairly certain. I don't know where I was born. There's no house or piece of land or any bones round here I could say, that was me before I was born. I don't know if I come up from the hills or down on the plain, from the woods or some townhouse with balconies. The girl who left me on the steps of the cathedral in Elba might not have been a country girl at all. She could have been the daughter of some rich folk. Or maybe I was taken there in a great basket by two poor women from Monticello, or Nieve, or even, why not, Cravenzana. Who knows what flesh I'm from? I've traveled the world enough to know that one is as good as the next, which is why you weary of traveling and want to put down roots, make a piece of land your own and be a part of it, so your flesh can count and last something more than a turn of the seasons. The fact I grew up here was thanks to Virginia and Padrino, both dead now, and they only took me in and raised me because the hospitals in Alessandria was paying them. 40 years ago, these hills were full of families so miserably poor, they'd take a bastard from the hospital as well as the kids they already had just to see a bit of cash. Some took girls so as to have a maid they could order around. Virgilia wanted me because she already had 2 daughters, and by the time I'd grown a bit, they hoped to set up a big farmhouse and all work together and come good. Padrino had a place in Gamanella then, 2 rooms and a cowshed, the goats and the steep bank of hazels. I grew up with the girls, stealing each other's polenta, sleeping on the same mattress. Angelina, the oldest, was a year older than me, and it wasn't until I was 10, the winter Virgilia died, that I found out by accident I wasn't her brother. From then on, sensible Angelina had to stop roaming the woods and gullies with us. She did the housework, made the bread and the cheese, and went to the town hall once a month to get the money for me. I boasted to Giulia I was worth 5 liras. She didn't bring in a thing, I said, and I asked Padrino why we didn't take in a few more bastards. I knew we were poor now, because only the poor bring up bastards from the hospital. Before that, when I was running to school and someone called me bastard, I thought it was just a word, like coward or layabout, and gave as good as I got. But even when I was a grown boy and the town hall stopped paying for me, I still hadn't got it into my head that not being Padrino and Virgilia's boy meant I wasn't born in Gamanella. I hadn't crept out from under the hazel bushes or sprung from our goat's ears like the girls did. A year ago, when I first came back, I went to see the hazels, on the quiet, trying not to be seen. The hillside, it's a long, unbroken stretch of gullies and vineyards rising so slowly that when you lift your eyes you can't see the top. And at the top, wherever that may be, there will be other vines, other woods, other paths. Looked as if winter has skinned it clean, scraped the earth and tree trunks bare. I could see it clearly in the dry light, sloping grandly down to Canelli where our valley ends. Following the narrow road along the Balbo, I reached a small bridge in the reed thicket. Up on the bank, I saw the wall of the house, its big blackened stones, the gnarled fig tree, the small empty window, and remembered those terrible winters. But the trees and the land had changed. The hazels were gone, nothing but maize stubble. An ox moved in the shed and I caught the smell of dung in the cold evening air. So whoever was living there now wasn't as poor as we'd been. I'd always expected something like this, or that the house would have fallen down maybe. How many times had I seen myself standing on the bridge wondering how on earth I could have spent so many years in that hole, walking the same paths, taking the goats to graze and looking out for apples that had rolled to the bottom of the gully, convinced the world ended at the turn in the road and the steep drop down to the river. But I never thought the hazels would be gone. That meant the past really was past. I was so shaken I didn't give a shout to see if anyone was in, then go on into the yard. All at once I realized what it means not to be born in a place, not to have it in your blood, not to be living half buried with parents and grandparents to the point that a change of crops or trees out there hardly matters. Of course, there were still other clumps of hazels up on the hillsides. I could go to them for a sense of my past. If I'd owned the land, very likely I'd have cleared it and planted maize myself. But right now the place felt like one of those rooms you rent in town, live in a few days or years, and when you move on, they're just empty shells, disposable, dead. Thank God, turning my back on Gamanella, I had Salto opposite beyond the river, with its high ridges and broad meadows fading into the sky. Salto's another hillside, all vines lower down, slopes broken by gullies. And that evening the clumps of trees, the paths and rare farmhouses, were all much the same as when I'd gazed at them day by day, year by year, sitting on the log behind our house or the wall of the bridge. Later, too, the years before the army, working at Mora in the lush plain beyond the Belbo, after Padrino had sold a place in Gamanella and taken the girls to Cosano, I only had to glance up from soil to sky, and there was Salto with its vines sloping down to Canelli, along with the railway and the whistle of the trains that ran beside the Belbo mornings and evenings, making me think of wonderful things, stations, towns. So for a long time I thought this village, where I wasn't even born, was the whole world. Now that I've seen the world for real and know it's made up of thousands of small villages, I'm not sure I had it so wrong as a boy. You cross oceans and continents, the way in my day youngsters here went off to dances in the villages and drank and fought and came home with feathers in their caps and bleeding knuckles. You grow grapes and sell them in Canelli. You dig truffles and take them to Elba. There's Nudo, my Salto friend, who keeps the whole valley supplied with vats and presses as far as Camo. What's it about? You need a place that's home, if only for the excitement of leaving. Home means not being alone, knowing there's something of you in the people, the trees, the land, something waiting for you even while you're away. Still, it's hard to live easy here. For a year now I've been keeping an eye on the place, escaping here from Genoa whenever I can, and still it baffles me. It takes time and experience to grasp these things. Can it be true that at 40, with all I've seen of the world, I still don't know what my village is like? There's something that doesn't add up. People think I've come back here to buy myself a house. They call me the American and show me their daughters. For someone who left the place as a nobody, I should be pleased, and I am. But it's not enough. I like Genoa too. I like knowing the world is round and having one foot on the gangplank, ready to leave. Ever since I leaned on my spade by the gate at Mora, listening to the layabout and floaters gabbing on the road there, these low Canelli hills have been my gateway to the world. Nudo, who in comparison has hardly been away at all, says the only way to stay here is never to leave. And to think as a kid he went playing clarinet with the band as far as Canelli and beyond, to Spigno and Ovada even, the east where the sun rises. We talk about it from time to time and he laughs. Chapter 2. This summer I went down to the Hotel Angelo in the Piazza, where no one recognized me with how big I've got. I didn't recognize anyone either. In my day people didn't come here much, We were out on the roads, the hillsides, the barns. The village is quite a way up in the valley, and the waters of the Belbo run past the church there a good half hour before they broaden out under my hills. I'd come to take it easy for a couple of weeks, and it turned out it was the August festival for the Madonna. So much the better. But with the out-of-towners coming and going, the hubbub and commotion in the square, even the black guy could have blended in. I heard shouting, singing, kids kicking footballs. Then when it was dark, fireworks and bangers. People drank, roared with laughter, joined the procession with the Madonna. All night long for 3 nights in a row there was dancing in the piazza, and the noise of merry-go-rounds, trumpets and air guns thudding away. Same noises, same wine, same faces as long ago. The kiddies running between everyone's legs were the same. The headscarves, the oxen yoked in pairs, the scent and the sweat. Women's stockings on tanned legs, all the same. And all the fun, sorrows and hopes along the banks of the Belbo. What was different was that back then I'd dive into the fair with a pittance of first wages in my fist. Head for the shooting range in the swings. We'd bully the little girls with their pigtails. And none of us knew yet why men and women and lads with greased back hair and stuck-up girls would bump into each other, take hold of each other, laugh in each other's faces, dance together. What was different was, now I did know, and that time was gone. I left the valley just when I was beginning to understand. Nudo, who stayed. Nudo the Salto carpenter, my ally in those first forays to Canelli, had played clarinet at all the fairs and dances down the valley for a good 10 years. For 10 years his world had been one long party. He knew all the drinkers and the clowns, and all the fun to be had in every village. For a year now, every time I come out here, I go and see him. His house is halfway up Salto, right on the road. There's a smell of fresh wood, flowers, and sawdust, so that for someone like me, brought up in a shack in a barn and just recently arrived at Mora, it felt like a different world. It was the smell of the street, the band, the smart Canelli houses I'd never been in. Nudo's married now, a grown man, working and giving work to others. And his house is just the way it was back then. Sunny smells of geraniums and oleanders, pots of them at the windows and out the front. His clarinet hangs on the cupboard. You're walking on wood shavings. They chunk baskets of them into the gully under the Salto Hill. With the acacias, bracken and elderberries, dry as a bone in summer. Nudo said he'd had to choose, carpenter or bandsman. So after 10 years of partying, when his father died, he gave up the clarinet. When I told him where I'd been, he said he'd already heard something from people in Genoa, and in the village the rumor was that before leaving I'd turned up a pot of gold buried by the bridge. We laughed. Maybe now, I said, my father will turn up too. You're your own father, he said. The good thing about America, I told him, is they're all bastards. That's something else that needs sorting out, Nudo said. Why do there have to be people who have no name and no home? We're all human beings, aren't we? Things are okay as they are. I managed well enough, name or not. You managed, Nudo said, and no one would dare say anything to your face now. But what about those who didn't? You don't know how many poor souls there are still in these hills. When I went round with a band, there was always some idiot or moron or homeless waif begging outside the kitchens. Children of alcoholics and dumb serving girls, reduced to living on crust and cabbage stalks. There were even people who made fun of them. You've managed, Nudo said, because for better or worse you found a home. He might not have much to eat at Padrino's, but he had something. You shouldn't say, let the others get by like I did. You should give them a hand. I like talking to Nudo. We're men now. We know each other. But back then, in Mora days, working on the farm, he was 3 years older than me. He could whistle and play the guitar. Everybody liked him and listened to him. He talked to the grown-ups, to us kids. He winked at the women. I was already following him around, and sometimes I sneak off from work to run down the gully with him, or along the Balbo, at the bird nests. He told me how to make sure I got some respect to Mora. Then in the evenings, he joined us in the yard and stay up late talking. And now he was telling me about his life in the band. The villages he played in were all around us, bright and leafy in the sunshine, nests of stars in the night sky. He taught the other players himself Saturday evenings in the shed at the station, and they'd head off to the fairs together, traveling light and fast. Then for 2 or 3 sleepless days, they'd just keep playing and eating without a break. Put down your clarinet, pick up a glass, put down your glass, dig in your fork, then your clarinet again, or cornet or trumpet, then another feed, then another drink and then solo, then an afternoon snack, dinner, up late till morning. There were parties, processions, weddings. There were contests with rival bands. The morning of the second day, the third, they come down from the makeshift stage in a daze. It was such a pleasure splashing your face in a bucket of water and maybe sprawling in the meadow grass among carts and cow dung and horse manure. Who paid? I asked. The council, families, rich folk, everybody. And when it came to eating, he said, the usual suspects. What they ate had to be heard to be believed. I was reminded of those feats they used to talk about at Mora, feats from other times and climes. But the dishes were always the same, and here Nudo mentioned them was like going back into the Mora kitchen and seeing the women grating and kneading and stuffing things, lifting off lids and lighting fires, so that I found the old taste in my mouth and heard the snap of breaking vine shoots. You loved it, I said. Why did you stop? Because your dad died. And Nudo said, for a start the clarinets didn't bring home much cash. Then all the waste and never really knowing who was paying makes you sick in the end. Then there was the war, he said. Maybe the girls were still itching to dance, but with who? People found their fun elsewhere in the war years. I like music, though, he went on, thinking back. Just it's not a good master. Gets to be a bad habit. You have to stop. My dad used to say it was worse than going after women. Right, I said. And how did you get on with the women? You used to like them, and every girl likes a dance. Nudo has a way of laughing with a whistle, even when he's being serious. No waifs applied to my old hospital in Alexandria. Hope not, he said. For every winner like you, a dozen losers. Then he told me of the 2 he preferred music. Get together with the others. Sometimes it would happen. Those evenings they came back late, and play. Him, plus a cornet, and mandolin, along the road in the dark, far from the village. Far from the women and the dogs that barked like crazy, playing just for playing's sake. I never serenaded anyone, he said. If a girl's pretty, it's not music she's after. She wants to show off to her friends. She wants a man. I never met a girl who knew what it meant to play. Nudo realized I was laughing and said quickly, Tell you a story. There was a guy in the band, our borero, played the horn. Serenaded a girl so often we'd say, all tune and no talk with those 2. We chatted like this along the road, or drinking wine at his window, with the Balbo beneath. Poplars lined along the thin stream, and the high slopes of Gamanella opposite, all vines and brush in the gullies. How long had it been since I drank that wine? "Did I tell you," I asked, "that Cola wants to sell?" "Just the land?" Nudo wanted to know. "Watch he doesn't sell you his bed as well." "Sack or feathers?" I murmured. "I'm getting old." "All feathers get like sack in the end," Nudo said. Then he says, "Have you been to take a look at Mora?" Good question. I hadn't. It was a couple of minutes' walk from his house on Salto, and I hadn't been. I knew the old man and his daughters, the farm boys and the house staff all had left. Gone. Dead. Or far away. Only Nicoletto was there, the dumb nephew who used to shout bastard after me and stamp his feet, and half the place that had been sold. "One day I'll go," I said. "I'm back now." Chapter 3. I got fresh news of Nudo's band playing in America of all places. How many years ago now? Before I had any thoughts of coming back, just after leaving the railroad gang, heading station by station to California, where I first saw those long hills baking in the sun and said at once, "I'm home." Like my own country, America ended in the sea, and this time there was no sense in boarding a ship again. So I stopped there among the vines and pines. If they could see me here with a hoe in my hand, I thought, how the folks back home would laugh. But you don't hack at the ground in California. It's more like gardening. I ran into some guys from Piedmont, and it irked. What was the point of crossing half the world to find people like myself? People who didn't like the look of me either. I left and worked as a milkman in Oakland. In the evenings, you could see the lights of San Francisco across the bay. I went there, hardly ate for a month, and by the time I had gotten out of gaol, I was reduced to envying the Chinese. Now I wondered what was the point of crossing half the world to find anyone at all. I went back to the hills. I lived there a while and found myself a girl, but then liked her a lot less after she got a job alongside me in the diner on the road to Cerrito. She'd come by so often to pick me up after work that it took her on to keep the till. And now she'd watch me all day across the counter while I fried bacon in filled glasses. When I went out in the evening, she came running right after me in her heels along the road, taking my arm and wanting to hitch a lift down to the sea or to the cinema. Away from the lights of the diner, you were suddenly alone under the stars in a loud din of crickets and toads. I wanted to take her with me into the fields, between the apple trees, or in the woods, or just on the low grass of the embankment, push her down on the ground, give some sense to all that noise under the night sky. She wouldn't hear of it. She scolded the way women will, said she wanted to go to another bar. Before you could touch her, we had a room in a back alley in Oakland. She had to be drunk. It was one of those nights I got news of Nudo. From a man from Bobbio. I knew it from the way he walked and held himself even before he opened his mouth. He was driving a timber truck, and while the guys at the pump were filling him up, he came in and ordered a beer. "Better a bottle," I said in dialect, deadpan. His eyes smiled and looked me over. We talked all evening, until someone outside hit the horn and wouldn't let go. At the cash desk, Nora tried to listen, winding herself up, but Nora had never been anywhere near Alessandria and couldn't understand. I even poured my friend a cup of bootleg whiskey. He told me he'd been a bus driver back home, and the places he drove to, why he came to America. But if I'd known people drank this stuff, not that I'm complaining, It warms you up, but you can't find a decent table of wine. You can't find anything, I said. It's like you're on the moon. Nora was irritated, kept fixing her hair. She swung her seats around and found some dance music on the radio. My friend shrugged, leaned across the counter, and pointing behind, said, "You like these women?" I wiped the counter. "Our fault," I said. "This land is their land." He fell silent, listening to the radio. Beneath the music, I could still hear the croak of the toads. Stiff and straight, Nora was watching his back, full of scorn. "Like this dumb song," he said. "Can you even compare it? They've no idea how to play." And he told me about the contest in Nizia the previous year, when all the village bands from Cortamelia to San Marzano, Canelli to Nieve, turned up and played till people could hardly move. They had to put off the horse race. Even the priest was listening, and the players drinking just to keep going. At midnight, they were still at it. And Tiberia won with the Nieve band. But there was a fight. Guys taken to their heels, bottles flying, and as he saw it, the one who should have got the prize was Nudo from Salto. Nudo. I knew Nudo. So then my friend started telling me who Nudo was and what he was up to. He said that same night, to show the dummies what was what, Nudo had sat along the road and never stopped playing till they got to Calamandrana. He'd followed them on his bike in the moonlight, and they played so well the women got out of their beds and clapped, and then the band would stop and play another piece. Nudo in the middle, leading them all with his clarinet. Nora shouted to do something about that horn. I poured my friend another glass and asked him when he was going back to Bobbio. "Tomorrow," he said, "if I could." That night, before going down to Oakland, I went out to smoke on the grass, away from where the cars passed on the road, up on the empty embankment. There was no moon, but a sea of stars, as many as toads and crickets. And that night, even if Nora had let me have her in the grass, it wouldn't have been enough. The toads wouldn't have stopped croaking with the cars racing down the slope, or America ending there with that road and those city lights beneath along the coast. There in the dark with the pines and the garden smells, I realized those stars weren't my stars. Like Nora and the people in the diner, they scared me. Eggs and bacon, fat wages, oranges big as watermelons, didn't amount to anything, any more than the crickets and toads. Had it been worth coming? Was there anywhere else still to go? Chuck myself off the pier, maybe. Now I saw why every so often they find a girl out on the road strangled in a car, or in a room, or at the bottom of some alley. Maybe like me, these people just wanted to bed down in the grass and get along with the toads, own a piece of land the length of a woman and sleep sound, not worry. But it was a big country, and there was plenty for everyone. There were women, there was land, there was money. Just that no one could get enough. It didn't matter how much they had, they wouldn't leave be. And the fields, even the vineyards, looked like public parks, fake flower beds like outside train stations, or the opposite, wilderness, wasteland, mountains of slag. It wasn't a country where a man could let go, lay down his head and tell people, "Worst comes to worst, you know who I am. Worst comes to worst, just let me be." That's what's so frightening. People didn't even know each other. Crossing the mountains, you saw at every turn no one had hardly ever stopped there. No one had ever put their hands in the soil and touched the place. That was why they beat up drunks and threw them in gaol or left them for dead. Bad booze and bad women. Came the day when really to touch something, to have someone know them, they strangled a woman, or shot her in her sleep, or smashed her skull with a spanner. Nora called me from the road to go to town. Her voice in the distance sounded like a cricket's. The idea of her finding out what was going through my head had me laughing out loud. But you don't say this stuff to anyone. There's no point. One fine morning she wouldn't find me there, that's all. But where to go? I'd come to the end of the world, the last possible coast, and I'd had enough. That was when I started thinking I might go back across the mountains. East.